am not a dyslexia expert. I need to throw that little caveat out there, but I can answer some questions, and if I don't know the answer, I can find out. The one thing that I want you to know is that dyslexia can affect pretty much everything about education for a student. It affects not just a student's reading, although that's what we hear about the most, but it affects their mental health. It affects where they're going with regards to educational planning. It affects their ability to learn math in some ways. It affects spelling hugely. It affects their life and potentially their career. And so for individuals that struggle with dyslexia, it's not a one and done. There's no easy fix, but there is help, and there are treatments, and there is remediation for that. So I want you to leave with that. How many of you have heard that Oklahoma does not test for dyslexia? We don't recognize dyslexia. We don't live and breathe dyslexia. How many of y'all have heard that in your districts? Okay, what I need for you to walk away from this meeting or from this afternoon with is that all of those things are wrong. And so if your districts are still saying that, I need your district special ed director or your district superintendent or your district somebody, an administrator in that district, to give me a call because they are at risk for a lawsuit, basically. Because Oklahoma does test for dyslexia. All of our schools do. All of our school psychologists do. We do recognize dyslexia as a specific learning disability. It is a reading disability. Falls under the category of a reading disability. Kids and individuals with dyslexia. I'm going to probably say kids or students, but I do mean individuals. I do mean older folks too. Adults are affected by dyslexia too. So just because I'm saying students or saying children or saying kids, I don't want you to feel like I'm excluding those of us that may have dyslexia as adults. So it is a specific learning disability. A specific learning disability is one of the 13 categories that you guys are learning or have learned about that you can qualify eligible for special education services in. And so the specific definition, according to the law, for a specific learning disability, it's a disorder of one or more of the basic psychological processes involved in understanding or using language, either spoken or written, that may manifest itself in the imperfect ability to listen, think, speak, read, write, spell, or do mathematical calculations. So when we think of a specific learning disability, you either have a disability in reading, in writing, or in math. So one of those academic areas. So you may say, well, what about history, science, social studies, all of those things? Those things generally fall into either writing or reading. So the three main areas are reading, writing, math. Okay? So when we talk about academics, that's what we're talking about, reading, writing, math in this world. Okay? So dyslexia is a reading disability. It is, I heard for the first time about 2 weeks ago, somebody that's much smarter than me say that a reading disability and dyslexia are synonymous. I've only heard one person say that, but he's super smart, so I believe him. We'll get out further information. We're working on an evaluation eligibility handbook, and so that'll have some additional information about that in there. And of course, you guys, I'm going to give you resources and tell you where to find the Oklahoma Dyslexia Handbook. So it's rare to hear the words a reading disability and dyslexia are the same thing. I'm not sure everybody in the dyslexia world would agree with that yet, so that might be a bit of a controversial statement. But what I want you guys to walk away from here knowing this is a reading disability, and students with dyslexia may qualify, they may not, but they may qualify for special education services in the category of a specific learning disability. So we talked about the 8 areas, or mentioned the areas reading, writing, math. for a specific learning disability, but also you could also have oral expression and listening comprehension, because those things so greatly affect your academics, your reading, writing, math. Okay? So reading comprehension, reading fluency, and basic reading are three different things. When we do evaluations for students, we may find a disability in one or more of those areas. Kids with dyslexia, typically, most often, reading comprehension and reading fluency are the most affected. Basic reading is, in general, kind of a combination of those with a few other pieces, those two areas and a few other pieces. Oral expression is just kind of what it says. It's what you express orally. Listening comprehension is going to be listening and processing information auditorily. Written expression, it's not just writing sentences. It is not your handwriting ability, whether you can write cursive or print. That's something completely different. But can you compose a sentence based upon your chronological age? And then math calculation and math problem solving. Math calculation is more like addition, subtraction, multiplication. Math problem solving, that's where your story problems and your higher level math critical thinking skills are going to come into play. So I've kind of gone into the specific learning disability in each area. When Jill shares this, you'll get all of this information. But I went ahead and wrote out the definitions for each piece of a specific learning disability, but I'm not going to read all of that to you, but I wanted you to have access to this in one place. So let's talk about dyslexia. Dyslexia, defined, it's a reading or a language-based learning disability that makes it difficult to read, write, and or spell. It does not mean that you write your letters backwards or that you see things floating around on the page. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But it is a specific disability that is neurological in origin. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that as well. Students with this may have trouble recognizing letters, matching letters to sounds. That's a big piece, a big component. Blending sounds into speech, pronouncing words, learning and correctly using new vocabulary, learning the alphabet and numbers. That doesn't just mean the rote ABCs, 1, 2, 3s, but it means the sounds and the coordinating figures that would go with numbers, but it means the sounds that would go with letters. Not the letter names, but the letter sounds. Talk a little bit more about that. Sequences of things, days of the week. Rhyming is a huge piece. So when you have, remind me again, do we have any early childhood folks in here? A couple elementary, few, and secondary folks? Okay, thank you. So for your early childhood kiddos, your kids that can't rhyme, that don't pick up on that, that's one of the red flags. This is a kid we need to watch as far as a potential student that may develop a reading disability as he or she gets older. It's a big red flag. We think about those sing-songy kind of rhymes we do with our little ones, and kids with dyslexia really struggle with that. So the specific definition is that it is a specific learning disability. Again, it's neurological in origin. It's characterized by difficulties with accurate and or fluent word recognition by poor spelling and decoding abilities. So remember I mentioned that it is more about the letter sounds, the sounds in our language, than it is about the letter names. And so you will hear, and I'll talk briefly about interventions in a little bit, you will hear folks mention, especially for early childhood, it's more important to teach letter sounds than it is to teach letter names. And so it's not all that important to teach kids the ABC song. And parents think, wow, my kid is the brainiac of the world. She can sing the ABC song at age 2. Well, that's great. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it's learning the sounds that are associated with those things that are more important. So if you had to teach one or the other, teach letter sounds, not letter names. The International Dyslexia Association refers to dyslexia as a language-based learning disability that does not arise from a physical limitation or developmental disability. It's not something you can do to someone. It is something that happens, and again, it's a neurological thing. It happens in the brain. Students will not grow out of it or improve by repeating a grade. If you see students that have dyslexia or a reading disability, and parents or teachers say, we just need them to repeat one more year, they're just going to catch up. No, they're not just going to catch up, because repeating the same process over and over again doesn't work. They need interventions in a different way. It's kind of like the definition of insanity. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. So just putting the kid back through whatever grade is not going to fix dyslexia or any reading disability. So these are some of the common myths about dyslexia. Probably you guys have heard of those. A child who reverses letters or numbers has dyslexia. For those of you who have little people in your family, or you teach little people, how common is it for first graders to turn letters around? It's very developmental. I mean, it's supposed to happen. It happens. What about second grade? It's still developmental, even at second grade, for most letters.
My son likes to write his name backwards on purpose.
Well, some of us have extra talents. I have a friend that's a nurse. She can write everything in mirror image completely backwards, and same penmanship, from forward and backwards. I don't understand it. But any child who reverses letters or numbers has dyslexia. Completely false. Completely false. Most kids reverse letters and numbers, and even kids with dyslexia don't always reverse letters and numbers. It's a visual problem. People with dyslexia see backwards, see words backwards, see letters backwards, or see numbers backwards or reversed. That is also a myth. Now, I have had kids, interestingly to me, tell me that letters or words move around on the page for them. And I'm not sure. I wonder now if I gave them that language or if they actually feel that way. But a lot of kids will benefit from line markers, just an old-fashioned ruler, and there are reading guides and things like that with colors. That doesn't really help. Color overlays don't help kids with dyslexia. It's a big myth. But a lot of times just having those things, words lined out, that is an effective strategy for some of our students. And I know if I'm reading a lot, it helps them too. If you don't teach a child with dyslexia to read by age 9, it's too late. They will never learn how to read. That is not true. Individuals with dyslexia that are in their 60s, 70s, even 80s can be taught to read. So that's not true. With the right interventions, I should add. Mirror writing is a common symptom of dyslexia. If you can mirror write, you're probably not dyslexic.
Just like that.
Huh?
That's what we had a student, and he was supposed to write rooster, and he wrote from left to right. From right to left.
How old was he?
9 or 10? 10. And he wrote rooster, and all his letters were backwards, but he wrote from right to left. What is that?
I don't know the answer to that.
We were both like, we've never seen that before.
And some kids will do that just to see what they can do. Some kids, it's just a matter of, giving the instruction right from left to right, just like you see it on the page, things like that. But I don't know without knowing other information. One of the myths is that DaVinci. Is it DaVinci? Am I thinking right? Jill, are you back there? Is it DaVinci? Yeah, it was DaVinci. DaVinci had dyslexia, but he mirror wrote everything. But he was an inventor, and so he didn't want people to read and know what all he was doing and thinking. So he just wrote it backwards or in a code of his own. And so, he didn't have the computer systems to code things like we do, to hide things like we do. So he was not. Another common myth about someone that has dyslexia is Einstein. Einstein created the theory of relativity. He solved complex math. Yes, he was different, but he was not dyslexic. Probably didn't have Asperger's either, by the way. Smart people cannot have dyslexia or have a learning pupil. Completely false. One of the key things about dyslexia and other learning disabilities is that IQ, or their students' cognitive ability, is relatively average or sometimes even way above average. So very definition of a learning disability is a big discrepancy between that cognitive ability and what they're able to do in the areas of reading, writing, or math. There's no way to diagnose dyslexia. Again, very false. It can't be diagnosed until 3rd grade. That is false. And I will tell you, I've made that mistake. I'm big about owning up to what I have done wrong in my past. I can tell you that once a child turns 8 years old, that chronological age when you are looking at an evaluation, just moving up, I've evaluated kids on their 8th birthday just so I would know that I would get that discrepancy, because I knew the day before when they were 7, I couldn't get that age discrepancy. And so we're starting to look at dyslexia, and I hope some of the things that you'll see when we talk more about evaluation in the coming year, when we put out our new handbook on that, is that you'll see that we diagnose dyslexia and other learning disabilities by using cognitive ability, by knowing their test scores in reading, writing, and academics, their standard scores, but also looking at their patterns of strengths and weaknesses in the classroom, and looking about what they can do, what they can't do, and how that works for them in the classroom setting. And dyslexia is caused by a lack of phonics instruction. Also completely false. We do need systemized phonics instruction, very specific interventions for kids with dyslexia, but it's not because they haven't learned it. It's because they have an inability to learn it because of a neurological condition. Children with dyslexia will never read well, so it's best to teach them to compensate. Not true. We've already talked about retaining a child will improve their academic struggles. Not true. There's tons and tons and tons of research available that says retention is not a good strategy for students. Okay. Now, I would say that, and I would also say if you are the parent of a young, specifically boy, and they were born later in the summer, and you think they just need another year of growth before they start pre-K or kindergarten, I get that. I'm just not saying that that's not accurate or good information for a parent you should know, and I wouldn't fight you on that, but you also need good information when you're working with kids with reading disabilities, that's not an effective measure for helping them overcome academic struggles. Reading and resource specialists are highly trained in dyslexia and remediation. We've been doing dyslexia trainings all over Oklahoma for the past month, and that is absolutely not true. I have reading specialists come to me every day and say, I don't know what to do for kids with dyslexia. So we are working on that in our state. Dyslexia is a visual difficulty. No, there's generally nothing wrong with the eye or the eyes themselves. Of course, they need a good vision exam so that if they do need glasses, that's the case. But again, that's not going to cure dyslexia. That's going to help with acuity. Dyslexia can be cured by special balancing exercises, fish oils, glasses with tinted lenses, vision exercises, modeling clay letters, inner ear improving medications, training primitive reflexes, eye patching, etc. No, Those things don't work. We know from research and from science that putting a cover overlay on a piece of paper is not going to fix a kid's disability in reading. Having them crawl or learn to crawl again is not going to fix that coordination, eye muscle coordination. Doing the midline exercises, that's not going to fix dyslexia. Again, there are some eye visual motor difficulties where vision therapy is effective, but dyslexia is not one of those things. And I've seen parents spend thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars on vision therapy that is not going to repair or fix dyslexia. And vision therapy is not covered by medical insurance or vision insurance. So that's just straight out of the parent's pocket. So that does not work. And sometimes it's hard to convince parents of that. So let's look at the brain. Like I said, dyslexia is a neurological condition. So the brain on the left is a typical brain. Well, I guess both brains are, it's a picture of a brain, okay? It's a visual of a brain. So for me, or for probably most of you guys, when I'm reading things and taking in information, I'm going to talk about myself, but maybe this is true. I've got Broca's area, I've got my occipital area working, I've got my parietal temporal lobe working, and all of these things are working together to help me process language, to help me process sounds, to help me turn what I'm reading on the page into a meaning in my brain and being able to output that. For someone with dyslexia, their Broca's area is working, which is in their frontal lobe. It is working sometimes overboard. You'll see you've got kind of a small speck here, but here you're taking in all of this information. Instead of processing it through your occipital lobe, where your eyes send information to the back of your brain, instead of making that loop, it's coming straight here. And poor Broca, he's just working his little tail end off as hard as he can, but those letters and sounds are not coming together. They're not working together. Okay, so that's what's happening in the brain. I don't think I put in, you can Google, I don't think I put in other representations, but you can see functional MRI. There's tons of pictures of those online. A person with dyslexia and a person that does not have dyslexia reading, and it's just phenomenal to see what areas of the brain light up when during an MRI when a typical person is reading versus a person with dyslexia. With a person with dyslexia, you see a little bit or a lot of firing up here in the frontal part of your brain. But for an average person reading, you've got all kinds of firing going on back in the occipital lobe and the parietal temporal lobe as well. So pretty fascinating to me. I love brain stuff. Not near as smart as I'd like to be about that, but pretty fascinating. What causes dyslexia? It is a congenital disability. We know that there are many hereditary components. A lot of times we will be evaluating a student. A parent will bring a student in, so they're really struggling with reading. And it is so common for me to hear, I also had special ed when I was in school. I struggled with reading too. Or I will hear, we will diagnose the student and the parent will say, oh my gosh, I wonder if this is what I have too, because I struggle too. Or they'll have a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle or someone else relatively close in the family that has struggled always in school. As we've talked about, and I hope that you've heard from all of us that have talked to you over the course of your boot camp experience, is that disabilities affect everybody differently. Just because one person has Down syndrome does not mean another person with Down syndrome is going to display all of the same characteristics. The same thing with cerebral palsy, the same thing with ADHD, the same thing with many other conditions that we experience. But it's very much the same with dyslexia. Dyslexia happens on a continuum. You'll have mild cases and you'll have very, very severe cases. And so some cases can be intervened and addressed through an MTSS or an RTI model, and students can get interventions and figure out the code and be able to work with that and not need special education. And you'll have other students that just have to have those special interventions and really have to be taught from the auditory level up on how to process and make speech sounds and turn those into sounds that match with letters. So always remember that, and you'll hear about autism too, just because you've seen or experienced or know one person with autism, you know one person with autism. The same is true with dyslexia. The better thing about dyslexia is we know now what works and how to intervene and how to help students learn to read. People with dyslexia can become good readers, and others may read slowly and inaccurately. Again, it just depends on the individual. Most persistent issues really have to do with spelling. Once an older person gains the ability to decode sounds and decode language and words, but they may always struggle with spelling. English is a weird language, and so we don't spell things very well in English. If you look at the word circus, circus has a lot of C's and S's, and they all make different sounds. Or the word quick, you've got QU that makes the sound, you've got a C in there, and you've got a K. So if you look at those, I mean, how do you teach kids the rules of spelling looking at those kind of words? It's very hard for our students and for us to learn to spell in English. Some of the effects of dyslexia, one of the things that Oklahoma pushes is a 100% graduation rate. All of our schools want a 100% graduation rate. Probably a good I can't say it, my mouth is not working. Graduation rate in Oklahoma is probably 80 to 85%, maybe 87. But about 50% of our students with dyslexia do not graduate from high school. Hopefully we're going to turn the ship on that. And hopefully we're starting that even more so this year than ever before, really trying to address that and make our students with dyslexia become known and receive appropriate interventions. Dr. Herfer talks, he's been helping us with some of our dyslexia trainings, and one of the things he talks about is students with dyslexia are substantially more at risk for parental abuse. And I wondered why about that? That doesn't sound right. I mean, just because you have dyslexia doesn't mean you're acting out, right? Or that you certainly don't deserve anything different than other students. But remember, often individuals with dyslexia, their IQ is pretty average or even above average. So they may be performing well. They may be super smart. They're going to be perceived as smart with the exception of reading. And so when it comes to reading, teachers are really good at this, and parents too. You're so smart. You must just be lazy because you're not reading. Or you just don't want to learn to read, or you're not applying yourself. And so in some cases, we've heard, we're just going to beat the lazy out of you. And so there's one study where kids with dyslexia are about 35% more at risk for being abused or have reported abuse at home because they were not reading as well as it was perceived that they should have been. We know our kids with dyslexia have very poor self-esteem. They suffer with anxiety and depression. If you have the opportunity to come to one of our workshops, we have a student panel, and I certainly can't do the same justice that they do, but the students will talk about how hard it was for them in school, and they didn't feel as smart as their friends. They didn't get to experience school the way their friends did. They had to work extra hard to get anywhere close to the results at school that their friends were getting. They didn't get to play football, or they didn't get to do gymnastics or dance because they had to do so much homework after school. So all of those things lead to poor self-esteem. They just feel like they can't do it. And you guys may have had some experience. For me, it's running. I would love to be able to run. It looks, honestly, to me, it looks enjoyable. To be outside, to be athletic, to have the build of a runner. I've always wanted those things. But when I run, I feel like an elephant. Just boom, boom, boom. And I constantly can't get it through my mind that I can train myself out of this and I can get better and better. No, I just can't get past that point. And so you may have something like that in your life that you wanted to do all your life, you really have a strong desire to do, but you just haven't figured it out yet. And so that's why we have kids that suffer with poor self-esteem, anxiety, and depression when they have dyslexia. Just that constant feeling of I'm not good enough. Suicidal ideation or suicide. There was one study, I believe, in Canada where a study researched individuals who had committed suicide and left a note. They looked at the notes, and about 89% of those notes were identified as probably someone that had dyslexia or a reading or writing disability or a learning disability of some kind. 89%. That's a super high rate. We don't really know, for individuals who are incarcerated, we don't really know how many of those individuals have learning disabilities. Information's pretty hard to get. But there have been lots and lots of studies that in some areas the level of individuals that are incarcerated that are illiterate or cannot read is super high. So when they get out of prison, what are they going to have to do? They're probably not going to take time to learn to read. So the recidivism rate is super high, especially for individuals with learning disability. So a big push is to teach reading in prisons. Substance abuse, being involved in the juvenile court system or the criminal court system later, again, when you can't read and you're always searching for, and you combine that with I'm not good enough kind of feelings, you're always searching for things that will help. When you don't have a high school diploma, super hard to get the pay. Your pay rate is so much lower, or your income, and so people resort to doing things that are criminal. So how widespread is dyslexia? Most people will agree that it's between 15 and 20% of the population has some form of dyslexia. Kind of the average there is about 17%. So if you look at the students in your classroom, that's 1 in 5. About 1 in 5 students probably have some form or fashion of dyslexia or a reading disability. That's more common than anything that we're seeing. It happens the same in girls and boys. There's no differentiation there. You can stop me if you have questions. I don't think I said that before, but if you think of questions in the air, please mention that. So some of the signs, we've talked a bit about this, just difficulty learning to read, write, spell, and do math. Difficulty in following oral and written instructions. I mentioned rhyming earlier. Following instructions and sequencing is also a big red flag there. cramped or illegible handwriting, difficulty staying on task. For kids that have ADHD, I'm drawing a blank on the statistic, but almost all kids with ADHD may also have a reading disability. The comorbidity, cannot talk this morning, right, is super high for individuals that have ADHD to also have dyslexia. Confusion in sequencing letters and symbols. You'll see kids, especially with B's and D's, they'll learn that a capital B looks different than a D, and so you'll see kids put random capital B's in things when they're really starting to learn and they're figuring out language. Can't remember if I put it in here, but I'm going to get through this slide. Remind me to tell you about a picture that I saw. Delayed spoken language. It is an oral, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. It's an oral language disability. And so developing language is also a big red flag for dyslexia. For our kids that are in speech, a lot of our kids are in speech before that. And I remember as a very young speech pathologist when I first started, and I kept thinking, all of these kids have delays in reading. It's because they can't visualize the sounds. They see the word cat, but they can't say that. And so that's why they're having trouble reading cat. I was kind of on the right track. I knew that reading and the sounds went together, but the research wasn't there to back up what I was thinking at the time. It was probably there, I just didn't know of it, I should say. Confusions about directions in space, time, right, left, up, down, north, south, yesterday and tomorrow. For me, I'm not dyslexic, but I can much more quickly tell you the difference north, south, east, west than I can tell you left and right. To tell you left and right, I have to hold my hands up in the air, I have to really think hard. North, south, east, and west, I know where I am, I can tell you which way that is, but left and right, I can so identify with that. Just high levels of frustration and anxiety, difficulty retaining information, bigger test-taking anxiety, especially as kids get older. Either an increased or reduced energy level, an increased, again, for those kids specifically with ADHD, a reduced energy level for those kids who have given up. I can't do this anymore. Okay. Immaturity may also be a sign, but again, we have to filter that in with a lot of these kids also have ADHD, so where are we seeing, what is the difference there? So for a student with dyslexia, one of the examples I like to give is if you see a cow, if you see a picture of a cow, if you see a cow, you know it's a cow. It doesn't matter if it's this way, if it's this way, it's a cow, it's a cow. For kids with dyslexia, they see the same thing. They see a cow, they know it's a cow, whether it's this way or this way, but they see a B or a D, and they cannot, it does not register with their brain. It's not that they can't, but it does not register with their brain that there is a difference. So if we see a cow facing left and a cow facing right, we know it's a cow. If we see a B facing one way and a D facing another, we know the difference between a B and a D. For them, there's no difference, especially those lowercase letters. So for you, you might put that, your mom is going to know you from Adam, come hell or high water. But that's kind of like looking at that cow. I'm always going to know that's a cow. But if you flip-flop it, it looks different for a kid with dyslexia. So again, I mentioned speech problems are often associated for a kid. Spatial disorientation, we talked about the left and the right. Sequencing verbal things, difficulty on time, judging intervals. Organizational abilities. Again, some of that's dyslexia, some of that may be the ADHD, and that mixed lateralness. So I love this slide. Dyslexia isn't just about reading. So this is one of the ones that I wanted you to have, just because I think it is, kind of encompasses everything that I've talked about in one picture. Difficulty getting ideas on paper, organizational, can't find the right words, problems with note-taking, background or noise distractions, similar sounds cause confusion, difficulty hearing sounds, I'm going to talk about that in a second. Can't remember what words look like. You'll see kids that'll want to figure out and they want to memorize the shape of words when they see a word in print. And, you know, obviously that's not a very good way to learn to read. Difficulties with telling time, left and right confusion, getting lost easily, difficulty remembering phone numbers. Nobody can remember phone numbers anymore, I'm just saying. Sequencing, alphabet, timetable, dates, all of those have to do with memory. With their motor control, there's a little bit of research out there that says there's some coordination issues, some motor planning issues. Research is a little sketchy at this time. I'm not as familiar with that. Difficulty with handwriting or copying, that may come into the dysgraphia. We'll talk about that. As far as reading, losing their place in text, moving or overlapping text, those things need to move around, and just needing to reread. So you guys will get all of this. So the difficulty hearing sounds, one of the things that I wanted to mention that Dr. Herford really brought to my mind, and it makes perfect sense to me now, is when he starts to teach students to read, students with dyslexia, he takes it all the way back down to the phoneme level. So it's all the way back down to the sound level. Not even looking at letters, but having kids begin to distinguish between the sound of A and the sound of I. A-I, A-I, is that the same or different? And then A-A, A-A, is that the same or different? And taking it back to where they can begin to distinguish hearing sounds differently. And if you can hear it, then you can also teach the shape of the sound and the other sounds that go into words and letters. And so that is one of the things that they start talking about. You can't sound out a word if you don't know that different letters make different sounds. So that's kind of what the beginning of that comes from. Like I said earlier, dyslexia is the most common reading disability. I think I might have to go back in and change the slide after talking with Dr. Herbert for the past couple of weeks, but I didn't change it for this. So I mentioned this earlier, to diagnose dyslexia, the way Oklahoma still looks at it as of today is that we are going to find that discrepancy, like I said, between their cognitive ability level, basically their IQ, and then how they're scoring on the reading evaluations, reading assessments. And we want that discrepancy to be about 2.5 standard deviations, okay? And that's a pretty big discrepancy. So if you have a student with an IQ of 100, which is average, approximately, don't hold me to this, but just so you'll know, an approximate discrepancy number there would be their reading scores would be in the 70s on a standardized assessment. So that's a huge gap. It's a huge gap. So it would be in the upper 70s, but still that would be something that we would see. Again, what we're going to be taking into place is that we also want to look at how the student's performing in the classroom. We want to look at their patterns of strengths and weaknesses. We want to know what is going on at home. How are they spending their time at home? Are they working on homework when they get home for hours on end? You have to take a look at something bigger than just the test. Did you raise your hand?
Yeah. So do students with lower IQs, are they not usually diagnosed with
Dyslexia? Depends on how low the IQ is. So for an intellectual disability, that's going to be an IQ of 69 and below. You can teach individuals with lower IQs to read. It just might, their primary category, their primary area is probably going to be the intellectual disability, and then you would work on that. So it's rare to see an evaluation come back with that being the case. And I've seen it. I'm not saying it haven't happened. But if you're looking at that kind of IQ, you have other issues to solve. But what I can tell you too is that evidence-based, research-based interventions do work for those individuals, and you can teach individuals with lower IQs to read. So, in the district that I came from, we used Wilson reading programs, and I've met Barbara Wilson, her husband Ed. She developed it. I can't remember what year. The program. She was working in I can't remember if it was a jail or a prison, and noticed how many of those folks were not able to read, so she developed this program to begin to teach them how to read, and now they've backed it back down to be able to work with younger kids too. It's very effective. It's very expensive. Requires a lot of training, so a lot of districts in Oklahoma don't use it. But I talked with her, and I really begged her. They've not gotten a great response from Oklahoma, so they're not real big about coming to Oklahoma, but I begged for her to come and look at the district that I worked at, mainly because we were using Wilson products with our kids with lower IQs in our self-contained settings, and we were seeing them learn to read. And so I really wanted her to come in and research that, so that we can say, hey, this also works. So I know it works. I've seen it work. You just have to have the right program, the right teacher, teach with fidelity, reliability, and all of those things. So you don't often see the two categories together, but I've seen it on paper. I've seen it in kids. So again, we'll look at the discrepancy, the patterns of strengths and weaknesses. Again, the failure to respond to other intervention models. So when you look at patterns of strengths and weaknesses, again, I just wanted to put this slide up here so you guys would have it for later, to refer to a little bit later, because you want to look at the students' cognitive abilities, but you also want to look at their academic abilities. And if you're seeing their cognitive abilities be up here in the average range, they're doing things that other kids are doing with the exception of reading, that's a red flag, and we need to take a look at that. And I think that as a very generalized statement is that sometimes general ed teachers miss that. They just say, you're being lazy, you're not trying too hard, let's change our vocabulary there. I love this quote by Josh Clark. It says, identifying a child's dyslexia doesn't limit their potential. It empowers them to understand the nature of their differences and strengths and their path for success. So one of the things that our students have said in our student panels is a couple of different things. One, our younger students, we mainly brought them in to talk to teachers because they were about middle school age, and a couple that were a little bit younger. And just to hear them talk about, I struggled with reading, I didn't understand why I couldn't do it. I mean, what do we go to school for? What was the thing when you were a little bitty, or your kids, what are you most excited to do when you go to school? What do you want to learn? What do you want to learn on your first day of pre-K or your first day of kindergarten? I want to learn to read. That's why we go to school, even as little bitty people. That's what we go to school for. And so when you hear them, our middle school age kids say, I wanted to learn how to read. That's all I wanted, but I couldn't do it. And so, when they talk about their experiences of learning that they had dyslexia, and then learning how to become advocates for themselves, how to say, I have dyslexia, I need more time, or I need to do this differently, or I need this accommodation to help me do the same thing that my peers are doing. And it frees them up, and so it doesn't limit them. So sometimes calling a spade helps you deal with what you have. And it also helps you become a better advocate for what you need. I can say this for my kid. My kid does not have dyslexia, but she does have ADHD. And she does have chronic migraines. And for her, the past couple of years, and she's a middle school kid, the past couple of years have been really hard for her. And so I can identify with the kids with dyslexia as they come in and say, when I learn to use words, when I learn to say, this is my disability and this is what I need and this is how I can be successful, that really empowered them. And so over the past year, I've really been trying to teach my daughter how to say those things to her teachers respectfully, but to advocate, I need more time on this assignment because I've had a headache for 2 days, or by the time I got home last night, my head hurt so bad I couldn't read anymore. I just need a little extra time. Or she's become, and I had a meeting with her teachers last week, and they said she is a great advocate for herself. She's great at communicating with us her feelings and what she needs to be successful. And I've seen that work for her doctors too. I mean, she's great about, we've been in the hospital several times, and for the nurses to come in and just give her injections in her IV. She's really good about saying, what is this medication? How does it work? Why are you giving it to me? All of those things. So I just think for our kids with dyslexia, if we give them and empower them with the knowledge of, this is the information about your disability, other people have made it and been successful, and you can too. So we know some really important people have dyslexia in our everyday lives, and there are a lot of people that aren't famous that have dyslexia and are very successful. But you look at folks like Tom Cruise, he memorizes all of his scripts, but he's dyslexic, severely dyslexic actually. Steven Spielberg's dyslexic. There's just very successful people. So when we equip our kids with that kind of knowledge, that just because you struggle with this, yes, you can learn to read and you can move on and you can do things in your life that are really important. I know you guys have already had Able Tech come in, but assistive technology is huge for our kids with dyslexia and reading disabilities. I didn't bring anything with me today. When she came, did she bring the pen or anything?
She brought a lot of things.
Okay. So for one, there's a thing called a C-pen, and basically you can drag it across a page and it will read either to the earbuds or out loud to the student. It's very good for short tasks. You can get those at Able Tech, and kids can try those out. There's tons of apps with your Chromebooks, with your Macs, with your iPads that can read out loud to kids. When we're not doing that for kids, they're missing vocabulary. They're missing the lesson. So it's not all just about learning to read. They have to be exposed to the content in a way that they can understand it. So we're shorting them science and history and social studies if we're not allowing them to use their great skills, which are often in the auditory area. So that's what we need to do. Note taking, oh my gosh, I've struggled with secondary teachers, and I'm going to pick on you if you're in the secondary level. But it's not you guys, it's the general ed folks. But again, I'm halfway teasing here. But for teachers who they would do a PowerPoint, but they would not give their students the notes ahead of time because that was cheating. No, it's not cheating. Give them the notes so that they can use technology to access what you're saying so that they can memorize. There's tons, again, of apps that you can record, especially like a lecture on, and a person with dyslexia can type a word in or type a memory cue in to just help them remember, hey, I need to go back and listen to this point again. And in the app, it'll take them right back to that. I personally can no longer keep up with all the assistive technology and how fast it's coming out and changing. There are people that just concentrate on that, and they have trouble keeping up. So I'm so thankful for all of the things that are coming fast enough that I'm not going to give you a lot of specifics about it today because it changes so fast. But Able Tech does keep up on that, and they can help. And just remember, the use of technology should be the norm today. How much we all use, most of you guys have a laptop in front of you, and you may be taking notes. I like to take notes, but you're also using either your phones or your laptop as well. And how many years, if you think about maybe back when I was in school, our teachers said, you're not always going to have a calculator with you. You can't learn to do math on a calculator. You're not always going to have a calculator with you. Well, guess what? I do. And I use it. And our kids should have access to that too. Because I can add and I can subtract and I can multiply and divide. I can do a heck of a lot faster on this little device right here. So I do always have my calculator with me, Miss Steinfeld. This is kind of an old slide, but I just wanted to show it to you. It's not an old slide, but again, because technology is changing so fast, all of these apps, you may need to update them. But I just wanted to say, look, just quickly, look at all the apps that are available just to help memory skills or to help you apply information that you already have, to help you analyze information, to evaluate or to create new things. Stuff is coming out faster than we can imagine. So you'll have this. This is, you can get to the link down there at the bottom and it'll pull it up if you want to look at it a little bit closer because it's hard to see on the slide. Again, text-to-speech software. So for a student who can either take notes or use a voice recorder to help them, again, that's something that a lot of us use. How many of you use Siri or a GPS within the last 24 hours to go somewhere? We use it all the time, every day. The reader pens I mentioned. Graphic organizers, again, just using visual representations for students are a huge help. Note-taking tools, again, as your kids get up into secondary and have to take notes more and more. Note-taking is a skill, and I get that our teachers want to teach that because our students need it for college, but not everybody's going to college. And so, what can we use to help our students take notes better that works the best for them? Can students who don't speak English as their first language be dyslexic? Yes. It is not as likely if they are a student that speaks German, Spanish, Italian. Those are called translucent languages, and so most of the sounds and letters match up. So if you, even in German, if you see something written in German and you pronounce it in their German, it's accurate. French and English are opaque, which means there are layers and layers to that language, and just because a C is a C, it doesn't mean it's pronounced a sound or the sound or any other sound. It might be silent sometimes. So those are different. So it does occur in students that have or speak other languages. It just is, it's a bit different. You guys talked about secondary transition this morning. Again, something huge that you need to plan for as you are working with our kids with dyslexia. Again, we want to make sure that we're planning and preparing and helping them get ready for their education beyond high school and independent living.